All right, welcome back, Music Disciples. We're going round 2 here, our second episode.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Boston Mike.
L.A. Chaz here.
Sorry I lost my headphones just there, but
That's all right.
and Chaz decided to look at one of my guitars and play around with it.
I did, right here. Very good. Tell me a little bit about this guitar, Mike.
That is a gold top traditional Pro 4 by Epiphone.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's a fairly cheap one.
And how long have you had it?
I've had it a couple years.
Nothing's cheap to me. They're all good.
Yeah, I've had it a couple years. It works. It's kind of tough. I when it comes to my collection, so to speak, my newest one is right there. That's an EVH or an Eddie Van Halen Wolfgang Standard.
Can you see it? It's right here.
Green.
It's green.
And that's actually called Absinthe Green. But the ones I tend to gravitate to is my Telecaster and my PRSs. I have the pink one right there. And then this is a 2000 Fender, Mexican Fender, Stratocaster.
So if you notice behind us, there's very many guitars here that Mike has. Our picture of him and I with Joe Bonamassa a few weeks ago that we went to see him.
I'll bend over so you can see that.
And Mike bought one of these from Joe Bonamassa.
Wrong one.
And
I bought off of Joe's website. I bought off of Joe's website his remake. This is it is called Iridium Copper Color with P90 pickups, and this is a 1959 reissue.
Beautiful.
And as you can see, he signed it, but I don't really like to play it because he did sign it, and it's worth something, I would think.
It's going on the wall.
But it is a beautiful guitar, and I love it.
And he signed the case.
And he signed the case as well.
Beautiful guitar.
He's a good guy. Joe's a good guy.
So just to recap what we talked about in our early episode, we talked about the blues, what led up to the blues, what led up. Basically, Muddy Waters has a song called The Blues Had a Baby, and they call it rock and roll.
Yes, that's right.
And that's really the foundation of all the rock and all the great guitar players. They all credit the blues.
Just for a side note, Rolling Stones got their name from Muddy Waters, from a song on Muddy Waters, Like a Rolling Stone, and I'm a Rolling Stone, gathering moss, in one of his blues songs, and they decided to call themselves the Rolling Stones.
On that note, if you have not watched Cadillac Records, the movie, watch it, because the Stones and Muddy Waters in there, Willie Dixon, well, they're actors portraying them, but the Stones also are portrayed, and they tell Muddy Waters in Chess Studios when they're walking in, Muddy Waters walking out, how they got their name.
Yeah.
So it's a good movie.
Good song.
Woo! So for episode 2, where are we going, Mike?
I think let's talk about the British invasion, some of the bands that were a big part of the British invasion, maybe hit along what you would consider, what you might consider a good album on the British invasion, what I might consider a good album, because I think we have a little bit different flavor on that. I know everybody loves the Beatles. I'm a Rolling Stone guy, even though I love the Beatles too. But let's talk about the start of the British invasion, which was obviously the Beatles. And a few bands came over right away. The Beatles being, of course, the mainliner, the ones that really got it famous. But there were a couple of bands that came in before the Rolling Stones and actually showed true rock, as opposed to, the Beatles were rock, but not what you think of as rock. In my mind came to Eric Burdon and the Animals and the Kinks. The Kinks, to me, were a fantastic band. Still are. I still listen to it all the time.
Ray Davies and Dave Davies, two brothers.
Who hate each other.
Today they hate each other. But they might get back together.
They might get back together.
So as long as you're talking about the Kinks, the Kinks, because I like to go into a little bit of the history of working in the business, what labels they were on, because that was very important in those days, because the American labels, America is where they all wanted to make it. It was the most important country to make it in the world, because that was
just with sheer album volume.
Yeah, well, they were selling, and the tours were big because you have 50 states, and the Kinks were signed to Reprise Records, which was the first rock band on there, and that was Frank Sinatra's label.
Yeah, it was Frank Sinatra's label, the Reprise years.
And they used to record, now the studio changed names, but it was Echo Sound for a long time, and they recorded right on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. So
yeah. So and if you don't know, for people who are novices to rock and roll, on the very first album of Van Halen in 1978, what they did, I believe it was 78, what they did is the company, the promos, the promoters wanted them to do a cover. And they did a cover of
All Day.
All Day and All the Night.
All of the Night. It was 1977.
Was it 77 when they did that? See,
that's all right. I booked at my high school in L.A. I went to a Catholic co-ed high school, and we used to have concerts in our outside or in our courtyard. And I booked Sammy Hagar, the Van Halen. We had Montrose there, and we had Canned Heat.
Wow.
And and then they made it right after that. They all got signed.
Yeah.
So it was, well, Ronnie Montrose, Sammy Hagar was already playing with him before that, but he would still go out and play his own gigs.
Yeah. So. And if you know, All Day and All the Night was a Kinks song that made it big. And if you think about how important it was, even back then, for Van Halen to play it the way they did, because Van Halen, obviously Eddie Van Halen had the guitar working so well. The interesting thing is, think of All Day and All the Night coming out in 1963. And think about that, 63, 64, and think of how important that was and what a great rock song that was. Even back then, it was way ahead of its time.
They called it heavy metal.
Yeah.
They did.
It wasn't I don't think it was quoted as heavy metal, but they thought it was very progressive.
It was. It was when you listen to the guitar lead in All Day and All of the Night, you know?
Yeah.
And they really got me, you know? They were very important for many, many years.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to see the Kinks at my college. It's University of Massachusetts at North Dartmouth now. It wasn't back then, but they played in 1980. They played there to about 5,000 of us. And with that 5,000, they ended up by recording their live album from they were on their low budget album tour. And they ended up by recording One for the Road. And if anybody's a Kinks person, grab the live album One for the Road. The song Lola is specifically with us in there.
So what was your first concert that you remember or that you had been to? Or that you went to?
My very first concert was, bringing back years, 1978, Foghat. So
great live band.
Slow Ride. And this was their New Shoes tour, just before their New Shoes tour. And they were actually there with the Outlaws, and they're all dead now, and Marshall Tucker Band, which I believe
they're
all dead now. They're all
dead. Are we that old?
It was a $3 bill, which is for the Boston Garden. That was a big deal because that would go all night long. So it would start at 7 and end at 12.
So Foghat, like I said in the earlier episode, our first one, I always paid attention, even as a little kid. Who's the producer? Who produced Foghat?
I don't know.
Todd Rundgren.
Oh, yeah. That's
Todd Rundgren, and he's a Philly guy here from Upper Darby, I believe.
Yeah.
Which I think Todd Rundgren's a virtuoso.
Yeah.
You know,
if you see Foghat now, just so you know, Foghat, the main writer and singer was Stephen Peverick. And Steve Peverick passed away. So if you're going to go see Foghat, I think the drummer is the last remaining
Roger
person.
Earl.
from the band.
Yeah.
Everybody else is gone.
Lonesome Dave, he played slide guitar on there. Very good. And Dave Pervert, I think.
Dave Preverett.
Sorry, guys.
I was thinking of Steve Pearcy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave Peverett.
They were a great live band.
Yeah.
Saw them many times, Foghat, and they would just rock.
Yeah.
There used to be a place in LA called The Swing. If anybody is out there, The Swing was a big auditorium standing, and the Swing Auditorium used to be an old 40s dance club that they had big bands come and play, but then they turned it into a rock and roll venue in the 70s, and Foghat would play there a lot. Jay Giles, the Outlaws, I saw them there, and that place was so damn loud. You'd get out of there and your ears would be hurting, but we never thought of it that bad then. But hey, that's what rock and roll was about.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't talk about rock and roll until you talk about who started it all. It was the Beatles, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr. Ringo's still out performing with his all-star band.
Go see him.
He's coming in, I think, August to Philadelphia. Second. I can edit. So
yeah,
still working. Right? Yeah, still working. I'll edit that out.
All right. Okay. We're back. We never discussed it, but what do you think about, I'm just going back a little bit. What do you think about Sun Studios, too, in Memphis?
Yeah, Sun Studios was a big deal. I mean, obviously Elvis Presley.
Carl Perkins.
Was a big.
Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash was a part of
Roy Orbison, who to me had one of the most beautiful voices in rock and roll. I happened to see him twice.
The Big O, man. He was a fantastic guy. And then of course, people probably know him from the Traveling Wilburys. He was part of that super band with George Harrison himself, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, and Bob Dylan.
Great.
They're all successful on their own, but they decided to get together and make an album. They end up by making 2 albums. But when it comes to the Beatles, I'm a John Lennon guy. I like, Lennon and McCartney did a lot of the writing early on, and then Lennon sort of broke off. We talked about in the earlier episode that my favorite, his is Rubber Soul, my favorite's Revolver. And you could see a progression from the early 60s when they did those hellacious tours, Shea Stadium, you see all those, how they couldn't even hear them screaming, how they had it. They were on Ed Sullivan, and it was a big deal to see him on Ed Sullivan.
It was huge.
It was a big deal because they were so well known by that time. And actually that was our first introduction. But after they left Hamburg and started at the Cavern Club in Liverpool, when they made it big, everybody heard about them over here. That's why when they finally came over here, it was such a big deal because I think they had their first album, they had something like every single song charted in the top 40.
Which is amazing.
It's amazing. And you only made 8 songs back then on albums. Now, in the albums now and the CDs or the downloads that you see, they have like 18, 20 songs. Back then, they would spend 2 years, not those guys, but they would spend a year or so perfecting just 8 or 10 songs, and that would be it.
It's a big deal. And I just know because the Beatles, Decca Records passed on them.
Yeah.
This is hard to believe somebody would pass on the Beatles, but, back then, they weren't known. So,
yeah,
they were known to a certain audience in Liverpool and more. And have you ever been to Liverpool?
I have been to Liverpool.
Wow.
Good.
I have not. Oh. I should go.
I've been to Liverpool. I've been to the now new Cavern Club. Okay. Because they got rid of the old Cavern Club, but they made a look-alike. Mm-hmm. It's very small. You're lucky if it holds 100 people. And it's almost dungeon-like. But yes, I have. And they actually have an area called the Royal Albert Docks. and that's where sort of Faneuil Hall, the Riverwalk, Faneuil Hall in Boston, Riverwalk in San Antonio. That's what the Albert Docks is like in Liverpool, where you can go and drink and have a good time, have some great restaurants to go to. And they actually have a Beatles museum there. So I do suggest if anybody has a chance and they go into London to take a ride to Liverpool, it's about 3 hours away. And you can really immerse yourself into that whole culture because Liverpool is a separate entity into itself.
Yeah.
If you ever listen to the Beatles, the way they spoke was only the way people in Liverpool speak. Everybody else in the country doesn't speak like they do. The way they sound is totally different.
And I've been to London a couple times. I should have gone.
Yeah.
I never went. Should have gone.
Yeah, you should take the Abbey Road
All right.
tour too.
I'm ready. Who's ready to go with me? So the British invasion, for me, being a kid, I mean, that to me, it was, I mean, and everybody who grew up with it, it was a movement. It just wasn't music. It was a way of life. It was the hair, the clothes, the style, the attitude. I had Beatle boots because my older brothers had them. And I wanted them. Hardy's Shoe Store sold them in West Covina, California. So I got them, wore them to school. Went to Catholic school, and the principal saw me wearing those Beatle boots, sent me home. I was 7 years old because I was a rebel. and so that was, it was a movement. The Stones were a way of life for people growing up. If you were really into music, and I was into the Stones just like you.
I am a Stones lover over the Beatles, although I do listen to the Beatles a lot. I love the Beatles. But I'm a Stones guy because they were always like the bad boys. They were the
bad boys of rock and roll.
They look dirty compared to the Beatles. So I always gravitated to that dirty look, saying, wow, they're really grungy, and they spoke about, they sang things that probably weren't, the Beatles would sing things, say, that had a sexual connotation to it, but you might not pick up on it, where when you listen to the Rolling Stones, they're right in your face about it. They did Ed Sullivan, and they were supposed to do Let's Spend the Night Together. It was about spending the night together, a man and woman, of course, but Ed Sullivan said you can't go on unless you say let's spend some time together.
And what did they say? They did it, but
they did it.
Hey, it was back then, and things were banned.
And they never went back.
To me, I always liked singers that were upfront singers. For me, I liked singers that were just singers of the band, and they weren't playing the guitar. I didn't know this till later on. I started thinking about it in life. And Jagger, incredible.
Yeah, he can play guitar.
Yeah, I know.
I've seen him in concert playing guitar.
Well, me too. But when he rocks and works the stage,
yes,
phenomenal. I saw them in the early 70s, and then just saw them last year, 2024. And just looking at him, I'm going, this guy still rocks.
Yeah.
You know what he did? He stopped doing drugs.
Yeah. The first time I saw them was in 1981 during the Tattoo You tour.
Yeah.
What was interesting is that they were out there, and just so you know, they were sponsored by Jovan Musk Oil for men. It's an old scent for guys way back when, but I actually have the bronze ticket because I bronzed it because it was supposed to be the last time they were going to tour, because Mick said, we're 35 years old. How much more can we do? At 35, I'm getting old. I don't think I can do this. Now he's 81 and he's still touring.
Still rocking.
Yep, still sounds good.
So what other bands from the British invasion? Because there was a lot of bands that came to America.
And Liverpool, Jerry and the Pacemakers.
Big band. They were right up there with the Beatles selling.
And if anybody likes Premier League football, or Premier League soccer, as we would say, Jerry and the Pacemakers had a famous song, You'll Never Walk Alone. Well, that's their theme song, and actually on the Liverpool Football Club's logo, it says You'll Never Walk Alone on it. A very famous song.
Ferry Cross the Mersey.
Yeah, Ferry Cross the Mersey as well.
So,
because the Mersey River is in Liverpool.
So what other bands do you think of, or artists?
I like I said, I think of the Kinks. The Kinks was so
The
good.
Animals,
The Animals, Eric Burden and the Animals, they were ahead of their time.
Chad and Jeremy.
Chad and Jeremy, I didn't listen to that much. You
They
did?
did. Well, they were softer.
Yeah.
They weren't the rock, but they were.
Hermits.
Love the Hermits.
I didn't love them.
Yeah, I know. But I met Peter Noon a few times, and he's so damn nice. But he was part of the British invasion then.
Yeah.
He was 15, I think, when he had his first hit. All these guys were so young. When you think about the Beatles retired in their 20s.
Yeah, they were 18 when they made it big. I mean, George Harrison was actually 17 or 16. He was much younger, and Ringo was a year older than them. But when they just the Beatles, when they were making it big in Hamburg, they played usually about 6 hours a day in Hamburg. Because that's how they got to really get good at their job.
At their craft.
And the first time they were over there, then they got rid of Pete Best and they brought in Ringo because Ringo was with another band and they happened to be over there, and they changed out for Ringo Starr because he was a better drummer. But George Harrison, he couldn't go the first time out because he was too young and he wasn't allowed to go into Germany at the time.
What was the name of the band that Ringo was in?
I forget.
Johnny and the Hurricanes.
The Hurricanes.
Just a little music trivia. Hopefully we inspire you guys to look up some stuff,
let's check them out.
But Ringo to me is phenomenal drummer because he plays so different.
He is a very underrated drummer. He plays lefty and everything's a little bit different. He doesn't play with a big kit either. So he plays more like a jazz drummer, actually.
I like it.
I can't leave without talking about The Who, because I love The Who for many, many years. I still listen to them constantly. But their first albums, when they first came out during that British invasion, they had Substitute, they had Magic Bus.
People try to put us down.
My Generation. Pete Townsend, as I've said in the earlier episode, he was going to his own drummer. He had his own beat. He didn't use any sort of blues, jazz influence. He wrote and he did music the way he wanted to. So if you listen to The Who, you won't hear any influence, as far as I know. You don't hear any influence of blues or anything like that. They are totally self-contained on their own. They came over, and the things that they did, because Keith Moon, the drummer, was crazy, and they did a lot of. Unfortunately, Keith did a lot of drugs and everything. But what's interesting is I saw a documentary with Pete Townsend, and he talked about the band, and I never realized this, but he said the problem is we all think we're the lead. So we all think we're the lead in the band. And I never thought about it because Darja Daltrey's the lead singer, but if you see John Entwistle thinks that he's the lead of the band. So you see the way he plays like a lead bass. And Pete Townsend plays lead guitar. And at the same time, Keith Moon always plays the lead.
They were like the early mod,
Yeah, they did the mod.
If you
Quadrophenia is all about the mod.
Yeah, if you know what mod is or don't know what it is, the faces were mod. And the small faces were mod with their certain haircuts, kind of like a mop top haircut. Kind of like what Brian Jones had of the Stones. He had a mod haircut.
Yes, he did.
And, great artist. So
they're reconnecting. So,
okay.
Let me see if it went out. That seems to be okay.
It's all right?
Yeah, it seems to be okay. Just keep going.
Okay. I'm going to put this guitar down.
Yeah, we can do. Yeah, it says it's reconnecting, and you can always. find things I can edit and stuff. Let's see. Stands. Hold on a second. Saying that it says my Wi-Fi dropped. Okay. There, I can use a personal hotspot.
It's back up.
Yep. Personal hotspot. Sorry, the Wi-Fi went down.
It's all right. We're back.
Let me just see. There we go. We're back.
All right. We're back.
So we'll edit certain things out. I'm just going to bring up some 60s bands here. 60s.
Well, are we on?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can just edit some out.
All right. So a band that I think just rocked everybody's socks, although they were short-lived. They had three of the best guitar players that ever stepped into rock. That was the Yardbirds.
The Yardbirds, yeah.
And the Yardbirds had Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, and who else?
Eric Clapton.
There you go.
Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck. Eric Clapton, I think, was first.
Yeah, he was.
And then it went to then Jeff Beck.
And then Jimmy Page.
And Jimmy Page, when the Yardbirds broke up, he started the new Yardbirds, which is Led Zeppelin.
Yep.
Which I'm wearing the shirt right now.
And Jimmy Page ended up producing all of Led Zeppelin's records.
Yes.
But where he got his production skills was through one of the top producers in Europe named Mickey Most. And he produced The Animals, the Hermits. He did John Paul Jones was also
he was a big factor.
Big session guy.
Yep.
People don't think of this, and they were already in bands before this, but never big. They were still session guys. And throughout my years in the business, some of these guys I got to meet George Harrison, kind of by a fluke. Ringo, saw him at the All-Star show. That is one that, because he always brings on a ton of stars or great players. Go see him.
All well-known people. Steve Lukather.
Yeah, and who knows how long they're going to be around. I keep saying that because you don't really know.
Well, I'm seeing Rod Stewart in July.
You are?
His last tour. Rod Stewart with Cheap Trick.
Love Rod.
Yeah. I like Cheap Tricks, and I love Rod. I hope he performs well because he is getting up there in age, but he already said it's his last tour.
So I saw Cheap Trick in the 70s up at this place in California called Mount Baldy, and top of the notch, you had to take a lift up to see him because you can't drive other than the trucks could drive up there. But Cheap Trick was on Sony, so I would go see him a lot. Great band. And I just saw him in Vegas about 2 years ago.
Yeah, I saw him a couple of years ago. I will say that when it comes to the British Invasion, those guys were so young. I mean, Jimmy Page, for people who don't know, Jimmy Page started as a session musician on other people's albums when he was 15 years old.
I know.
And he was a well-known guitar player back then. And that's where he met John Paul Jones, by the way, in the mid to late 60s. During the British Invasion, of course, takes place till like 67, 68, even though first 3 years were most important, 63 to 66. And that's how they met. And when they formed the band, he grabbed John Paul Jones because he knew what a great... John Paul Jones not only plays bass, but he's a really very, very good piano player and organ player.
He did the arrangement for No Milk Today by Herman's because there's strings, horns behind it. You might not think about it until you really listen to the song. But John Paul Jones did the arrangement for all that. Yeah. So, these guys started out, someone said to me, because I was managing this band and I wanted them to play a cover, and they said, well, Led Zeppelin didn't play a cover. I said, that's all they did. Because that's all they had been doing for 5 years before. You
That's
know,
all
they
did.
played on a ton of songs.
Yeah, we'll get into Led Zeppelin when we start breaking down in later episodes, breaking down individual bands. But I will say Led Zeppelin, one of their most famous songs is called "Trampled Underfoot," and it was a riff that Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones were doing, and then all they did was take Robert Johnson's Trampoline Blues. It's Trampoline.
Trampoline?
Trampoline Blues.
What does trampoline mean?
Trampoline Blues. They had Trampoline Blues, and all they did was they superimposed that song into that Trampled Underfoot riff. So that's where it comes from. Robert Johnson, the original blues man.
You know, these bands, I mean, during the 70s, there wasn't as many rules. And that's the first years that concerts started being big, you know, with Anaheim Stadium and stadiums and arenas, because before it was always clubs. But when these guys went into the stadiums, that's when everything changed, you know, for live performances, because it was big sound. It was huge sound.
Well, I mean, you simply look at the Beatles when they played Shea Stadium. They were playing with regular amps, not like we have today.
I know.
They're playing with regular amps, and they're trying to emote this sound in Shea Stadium, which was massive, and 55,000 people or 50,000 people showed up there, even though it doesn't hold that. And they were out in like second base trying to project, and people were so excited to see them, you couldn't even hear the songs, couldn't hear anything.
How many days did they play Shea Stadium?
I think they did two.
I think they did two.
2 days.
So being a Boston guy, do you know one of the bands that opened for them? It was from Boston.
Really?
Barry and the Remains. In case anybody wants to look that up, they thought Barry and the Remains were going to be huge. Fortunately, they weren't. That's the way music goes, but they ended up being great friends with Jay Giles' band.
Well, you end up with, when you're talking about the Beatles, what they accomplished in such a short period of time, which was basically 10 years. But the big thing is they took because of Brian Epstein, their manager who passed away, that was when they started to fall apart. Brian Epstein made sure that everybody knew everything about him. So that's why they did Hard Day's Night. And then they started doing other movies. So they did Help. And they promoted the music, and they would make music specifically for the film. But think about how big of a band you are that everybody would come and see your movies as well, because might be the only time. If you remember, they stopped after the San Francisco Candlestick Park. That concert was their last concert, and they never performed live again. That was, I think, 65.
Yeah, it was until they did their performance up on the roof.
Up on the roof.
But that wasn't a concert.
No, that was just
performance.
That was a performance because they were making a movie, a documentary about trying to get this. They were going to do a documentary or a performance for a TV show in London, like they did earlier.
Didn't the police want to shut them down up top because they didn't have the permits up there?
They did.
Hard to believe you'd want to shut down the Beatles, right?
Yeah. If anybody wants to YouTube that, just YouTube Beatles on the Beatles on the Roof, and it will come up. Watch it. It's a fantastic performance. And also, if you have, I believe it's Apple or Prime, they have Get Back. It's a 7-hour ordeal, but it's a great ordeal to go through because it shows the Beatles when they're ending and trying to make that Get Back video up on the roof. They had about 2 weeks to come up with about 15 songs, and they actually came up with it. But during that time, George Harrison quit. John Lennon didn't want anything to do with it. Paul was trying to run the whole show, and they didn't like it. I suggest everybody watches that Get Back.
I'll watch it.
Yeah. You haven't seen it?
No. Fantastic. I haven't seen it, but I'll see it.
Oh, it's fantastic.
This is why I'm here to learn.
Yeah. There's one part in that Get Back show, the series, that shows Paul trying to he gets so angry because he goes, I've been running this company for 2 years and you guys don't care. Because he didn't want to run it. He wanted everybody else to, but they all started to hate him because they were too lackadaisical, but he was on top of everything. And
he's still working today.
I know.
He still works today hard. Still out there.
Oh, I got one good one for you. The Grammy Awards about 10 years ago. You remember that? Grammy Awards. They had an after party, and it was an after party for a rapper. And the interesting thing is Paul McCartney was with him, Taylor Hawkins, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, and of the Foo Fighters, and Beck, who actually has 2 Grammys.
Great artist.
For Best Album. And they showed up, and there was a big guy at the front door, and they said, you're not allowed in. And he goes, why? He goes, I don't know you guys. He goes, well, and Taylor Hawkins goes, this is Paul McCartney, and this is Beck. He goes, I never heard of you guys.
Are you newbies?
Paul McCartney turns around to the other 2 and says, I guess we need to make some more #1 hits, don't we?
That's great. Did they get in?
They did get it.
Okay. I've heard the story, but I never knew if they got in or not.
Yeah, they did get in.
So good. Growing up with that air of the 60s, if you look at, because it doesn't happen today, it'll never happen again in music, but the change from 63 to 64 to 65, the look, the attitude, the music, the production, the sound, the concerts, everything was changing so quick. Drugs were coming. Everybody thought, the Beatles are clean and everything. Shit, they were doing as many drugs as the Stones. You know,
they weren't.
Yeah. What?
They weren't.
Yeah,
they were using just as many as the Stones. Unfortunately, but they got Stones are famous for getting off of them because, well, not Keith, but Mick Jagger got arrested back in like 67, 68, and because of that, he stopped cold turkey.
Yeah,
still enjoys an occasional beer, but didn't do drugs from that point on.
No, he's been clean a long time. He talks about it.
Yeah,
you know.
And in Keith Richards, if anybody has a chance to read Keith Richards' book, Life, he talks about it. His biggest regret is everybody still thinks him as a heroin addict when he actually stopped doing drugs in 1980.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah.
You know, and good for him because he's still rocking, you know. So the British invasion, you know, our politics are so strong today in our world. What do you think the British invasion, or did it have any effect on politics back then?
I don't think the British invasion had an effect on politics that I can see. I think when the American bands started to come in the later 60s, I think you saw a shift. I would say the only thing about the British bands when they came over is they allowed teenagers to act like teenagers.
Well,
I think because you had World War II and then you had the 50s. In the 50s, everybody's supposed to be prim and proper. And then the Beatles came in, and the Stones came in, and the Animals came in. And once you started seeing them, people wanted to emulate that. And it didn't go over well with a lot of the
No, it didn't go over well at all.
The parents.
You know, to me, the 60s or the middle 60s was the first generation, and I read a lot about history, and Mike does too, that was, just as you were saying, that was the first time that a 16-year-old kid didn't dress like his dad.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
And had to think like his dad, you know, and having 2 older brothers, one was 8 and 11 years, or 8 and 10 years older than me. I remember this. You know, and I grew up in a strict household, but lenient because music was always playing and my family was always open, having people over. But it was time of innocence, but yet it was changing quick, very quick.
You would know more than me. I grew up. I was.
Oh, I thought you were older than me. I'm just kidding out there. I'm older, Mike.
I was born in '63. So when we get to the 70s, that's when I'm really going to shine. Yeah. But in the 60s, I come from the last of 9. I'm the last of
the Boston Irish.
Yeah, my mom was a good Catholic, not a sexy Protestant, and as they would say. But my brothers and sisters, I had 8 brothers and sisters above me. They're the ones who really brought it in. I remember my brother. I remember him wanted to go to Woodstock. He packed up the car with him. My parents didn't want him to go. He was 18, and he goes, no. He went to Woodstock, and he broke down in New York, so he never made it to Woodstock.
Wow.
With 3 other guys.
That's something.
But I have my other brother was a huge fan of Moody Blues, which was later.
Yeah.
Moody Blues, ELP, which was later 60s. Jimi Hendrix, you name the American bands, he was into that, and he really loved Yes, which was later in the 60s, early 70s.
So I'll tell you how much music I was around. My older brother went up to Haight-Ashbury in 67. And you know how they got up there?
Thumbed.
From L.A. That's times where hitchhiking was allowed and kind of free then, but still, as a parent, you worried about that. And they did.
Everybody did it.
You know?
I remember doing it when I was a kid.
So we drove up there with my grandparents, and I still have this vision driving through Haight-Ashbury, and from 66 to 67, totally changed. Was the summer of love, pot smoking, and whatever else drugs were in, and was a whole different scene up there. That's when, all the Jefferson Airplane came in, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix.
Well, the British invasion was till about 66.
Yeah,
I'd say.
Really.
It really changed. Just so you know, I know Paul McCartney gives kudos to, because their sound, although it was really morphing and changing, it totally changed with what's their most famous album?
Sgt. Pepper's.
Sgt. Pepper's.
Sgt. Pepper's.
Sgt. Pepper's is probably one of the most iconic albums, but they actually listened to Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys.
Beautiful album.
Brian Wilson was meticulous about it. It took them a year to do, where they used to bang out, in a couple of weeks they would bang out an album. It took him a year to do. He was meticulous about it. And Paul McCartney always gives him kudos, because they listened to Pet Sounds and said, from an American band from L.A., saying, we got to do this. We got to do something like this. And that's where it came. And that's where you see the Summer of Love starting up in the 60s, like 66, 67 coming in.
I was fascinated by music in Hollywood. And a lot of the reason the record companies hire studio musicians a lot of times is because they can cut a record so quick versus letting the band go play the drums and they have to take it. It was common, and they did a ton of hits. The Wrecking Crew was a studio band in Hollywood, and they would use a couple studios that would back up the Beach Boys, a lot of the bands in there. Not the Beatles, not the Stones, but some other bands.
Most of the American bands.
Most of the American bands, yeah. And
there's a great documentary called The Wrecking Crew. If you get a chance to see.
Great documentary. And they used a studio out there, and the sound that they would get out of these studios, because I ended up going in a few, was incredible. And these studio guys, I watched them, they'd walk around and they'd clap their hands and they could hear the clap.
Yeah.
And that's how they like the studios that they choose.
And kudos, and we should put a shout out to Carol Kay. Carol Kay was a famous bassist in the Wrecking Crew. She's a fantastic bass player. She is actually going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I agree. As the first bass player.
Yeah.
You know,
she's fantastic. She was great for the Wrecking Crew.
Can you name some of the players in the Wrecking Crew?
Yes, Glenn Campbell.
Yes.
Glenn Campbell, before he made it big, Glenn Campbell was
Hal Blaine is the most recorded drummer ever for hits.
Yep.
Sonny Bono was there. Cher was there. Johnny Rivers started out playing with them, but then he went on his own. And just some of the guys, Leon Russell.
Leon Russell was there.
And just incredible when you think about all the music that was coming out. I love some of the music today, and maybe my age, but some of it I don't like, but I still respect music, whatever they do.
Yeah, and
So
those studio musicians meant so much to them because they were working every day.
every day,
They were working every day, and nobody would ever suspect that they were the ones actually playing on the
yeah.
albums.
In fact, they wanted to use studio musicians for the Kinks,
Yes,
and they didn't. The Kinks said no, we're
the
not.
Kinks had a raw sound. I
Yeah,
like that.
and they said no,
Come on.
we're using our own musicians.
That was in between Ray and Dave getting in fights against each other.
Exactly. Exactly. Another great time. So pause it for a second.
Yeah, go ahead. It's okay. I'll just edit it out.
Okay. Just take a minute, then we'll
Yeah.
figure out what next.
Yeah, I'll do another 5 minutes and then do the cigar review.
Yeah. So, but good.
Who's the, let me think of a band that we can bring up from the 60s.
Well, then we'll get into the late 60s. Ask me about Monterey Pop Festival or where I was.
Oh, okay. Let's see, Jefferson Airplane. It's all the Animals. Buffalo Springfield.
Moby Grape, but no
This
one
is all
knows
the
of it.
Beast.
Strawberry Alarm Clock.
Yeah, those are all. King Crimson was English.
Yeah, he was.
They were
I think
68 to 2021. Booker T and the MGs, Green Onions.
they were that came out in 62.
Yeah, Booker T.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Steve Cropper.
Yeah, with the soul sound of Stax.
The Hollies.
They were
62.
they were a British invasion group.
Yeah. Herman's Hermits, Shangri-Las, Mother of Invention.
Let's talk about some girl groups. Because the Shangri-Las to me were.
Oh, okay. You can talk about that stuff because
Do you know any of it?
I know some of the women that were involved, like Ronnie, the Ronettes, and those type of things.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, I can.
Or producers.
Wallace Sound.
Yeah.
Phil Spector before he got arrested.
I have a good story about him, but it's too long and involved. I won't get into it because he was going to produce the band that I was managing. It took me a year to get a hold of him, and he was dormant then. But
really?
Everybody always knew he was weird, but I wanted him. And so he sent me back through his assistant. Okay, I'll do it with 50 grand up front. I'm like, 50 grand? I have like $5. But and he ended up agreeing to it. He came and saw the band at Coconut Teaser in Hollywood, and then 2 weeks later is when it happened. Boom.
The Shirelles.
Yeah, I should write down some. You know what? I should write down some names.
I can just bring them up. I got it right here.
Yeah. All right.
All right, let's talk about this.
All right. Let's talk, because to me, it's who has influenced other people, and growing up, I would buy records on Atlantic. Anything on Atlantic, I'd buy. Atlantic Records. They were that because they had the soul sound. I would buy anything by them, which later on they became a rock thing. But the 60s, we didn't touch on the girl groups. The girl groups were just as important. The Shangri-Las were out of Queens, New York, and I saw them on this TV show called Lloyd Daxton, about 65, and I'm like, this girl is so hot, cute, and good looking and can sing. I'm like, I'm going to meet her. And I told my mom I was about 6, 7 years old, and my mom was like, yeah, okay. I ended up meeting her like in 1989. Her name, is Mary, and they had some great songs. In fact, Aerosmith recorded "Walking in the Sand." Walking in the Sand. But you had the Supremes. You had Martha and the Vandellas.
The Ronettes.
Ronnie Spector was incredible. I said Spector, but produced by Phil Spector, then his soon-to-be wife.
The
Shirelles. They were just my favorites. Everybody has a favorite song one of my favorite top 5 songs is "Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow" by the Shirelles.
Yeah.
And it was it has a violin part in it, and I used to play it when I'd go visit my old boss in Las Vegas that ran Warner Brother Records, and I told him, listen to this violin part in this. This is about 5 years ago. I've known him since my 20s, and he goes, that's my dad playing the violin. So music always, you gravitate to what it is. But yeah, who else besides Shirelles, the Martha and the Vandellas? I
mean, you have all the Motown sound.
Yeah. Mary Wells, she wasn't a group, but a great influence.
Yep.
Yeah,
I remember Tammy Terrell, but that was more in the later.
Yeah.
Chiffons.
Just there was a lot going on music-wise. AM radio.
Yeah. Yeah, my earliest memory is WRKO in Boston, him playing. They were playing, I know this is, I'm going to date myself, but they were playing Carl Douglas Kung Fu Fighting.
Everybody was.
On AM radio.
Everybody was.
Yeah. 1973, I think it was. That's when I really started to get into it. I was listening to my brother. He would always play, he was a big Jethro Tull fan, so he was playing a lot of Jethro Tull. That's when I started to really get into music, is in the early 70s.
That's when FM radio was full swing by then. It was 1970 when it came out and changed the whole listening, because you had stereo that was being broadcast.
Yeah.
I mean, to go through the music day, then we had quad. And does anybody know what quad is out there? You can call us. But it was 4 speakers.
Yeah.
And it would go around and play, but it didn't last. It was I think it was too expensive to produce to manufacture the records.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, when you getting back on the British invasion, what I like is you had that group like the Kinks, the Beatles, the Stones, the Animals, the Yardbirds, and then it started to morph into the later 60s, where it wasn't so much a British invasion, but then you also had the rise of some other bands through other bands. Eric Clapton left the Yardbirds, and he ended up by going to Cream, which was a fantastic, with Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker.
One of the best drummers still
Ginger
to this
Baker,
day.
Fantastic drummer.
And he's gone now, but
yeah, he's been on a few bands. He was in a few bands. He was in, I think, a Traffic, or no, he was in Blind Faith with him.
Blind Faith.
Steve Winwood.
Phenomenal.
Steve Winwood, if you know anything about Steve Winwood, he started out with the Spencer Davis Group when he was 16.
I think he was younger than that.
He might have been 15.
Yeah, he was 15.
When they toured, he was 16. They Give Me Some Lovin'. He's the one who did that.
I'm a Man.
I just saw him last year.
Keep running. Keep on running. Just the hits that,
And then he left, and he started Blind Faith with Eric Clapton and Ginger Baker, and they did that, and they had one album. That's it, one album,
and they still are known.
Yeah, and then they did one album, and they decided to stop, and then he and I believe Dave Mason and I don't know who the
Tim
Capaldi started Traffic. Find My Way Home.
Great band too.
Mr. Fantasy, dear Mr. Fantasy.
So before that too,
they're all English, by the way.
Yeah,
what we're talking about.
You're right. Before that was the San Francisco scene.
Well, English and American.
Yeah, yeah. But the San Francisco scene came on in like '67, and really took off. What was the big concert in '67?
Monterey Pop. And you went to it.
I went to it. I was 8 years old. I remember seeing Brian Jones walking around there saying hello to the crowd. He was all dressed up because he was a sharp dresser.
Yeah, Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones.
From the Rolling Stones. And unfortunately died in '69. But the Monterey Pop Festival was where Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Who, they played. And that was a 3-day festival. Eric Burden played. Well, a lot of bands played.
Yeah.
But it was 3 days, and it was in Monterey, California, in a fairground that was basically dirt. So, but
That's what gave him the idea to do Woodstock,
yeah,
is because it was so successful at Monterey Pop Festival.
so Jimi Hendrix didn't have a deal. Janis Joplin didn't have a deal. Clive Davis, who's a big-time record executive, and he ran Columbia Records, and went home, signed him immediately, and the rest. But Jimi Hendrix,
well, Janis Joplin was officially Big Brother in the holding company.
Right. Yeah.
They signed him as with them Big Brother in the holding company, and Janis Joplin, by the time it came around in '69, the record company didn't like the band behind her, so she went out as Janis Joplin.
Yeah, you always think of her as Janis Joplin, but you're right. She had it, and Jimi Hendrix, hard to believe he didn't have a record deal, and he's playing a big festival. You know. So
Jimi Hendrix started off over in
Europe. Yeah.
He started in Europe. He was originally with
Little Richard.
Little Richard. He was his guitar player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
then he couldn't make it here, and he went over there. And a quick story for you. He was playing over there, and Eric Clapton had seen him in concert. It was just a small little venue. And he immediately called up Pete Townsend. And he said, "Pete, you got to come and see this guy." And they both saw him together. And by the end of this thing, by the end of the concert, they said, we better get our act together. This guy's so much better than us.
You know who managed him? Who took him on as manager? Chaz Chandler, the bassist from the Animals.
Oh, really?
Took him on, and he's the one who guided him and to become Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, Jimi Hendrix was originally in a band called the Band of Gypsies. And the Band of Gypsies was supposed to have a record deal. And he reneged on the record deal. And then he went out as Jimi Hendrix and the Experience, and he did his, I think, 3 albums total. And then what happened is, in 1970, they sued him, so he had to fulfill his contract. So he did a live concert for 3 days in New York, and it is called Band of Gypsies Live. And if you go online, you'll be able to see that.
Really?
Yeah.
That one I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just downloaded it. So.
Okay. Got it.
I just downloaded it, so everybody, it's on iTunes. It's called, if you go under Jimi Hendrix, it will say Band of Gypsies Live. Okay. And it's all 3 concerts. It's a box set.
And he did it. You know what label he was on?
Atlantic?
No. Reprise. Frank Sinatra. Again. Reprise, Frank Sinatra's label. I mean, the guys that working at the record labels or that owned them or ran them at these times, there was still a lot of singers that were traditional artists selling a lot of records, that like Andy Williams, Johnny Mathis, and so to sign a rock band was a big deal then. Yeah,
let's finish up.
All right.
Let me just say this. Go ahead. See, because it says a little bit.
Yeah.
I love that you.
All right. What do we want to talk about next?
Well, we should wrap it up and talk about the cigars.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
Well, the episode number 2, talking about the music. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, right, Mike?
Yeah, I hope so. I enjoy it. I love talking about music.
I do too. I love it. I get a high from it. Somebody asked me when I was about 22, what makes you get off on music so much? I said, it's better than sex. And I just meant it as a metaphor, and they're like, really? And I'm like, no, but it's a high.
Yeah.
It is a high.
I love talking about it. Learning about more. I read a lot of books by the artist. I'm currently reading both Steven Tyler's book and Joe Perry's book, because Steven Tyler and Joe Perry didn't like what Steven Tyler wrote about him in the book, so Joe Perry wrote his own book.
And they're from Boston.
And they're from Boston.
They're from Boston.
Yeah.
Name some of the Boston bands before we end.
Before I go, we'll talk about him in depth.
Just name a few that I know of and you know of too.
Yeah, of course. There's Boston.
Boston.
famous band. Their debut album, 1976, one of the greatest albums of all time. We have Jay Giles Band.
The Bad Boys from
Yeah,
Boston, they used to call them.
Yeah, and we have
The
of
original.
course, we have Aerosmith, the Toxic Twins
Yeah.
of Aerosmith, and another band is the Cars.
The Cars, big.
We say the Cars.
The Cars.
Yeah, and their debut album. I actually saw them in 1982 with the Candy O tour, maybe, or the Panorama tour.
I saw them play the Sunset Strip trying to get a record deal.
Yeah,
you know,
they were great. They used to play in Boston. They used to play at Channel.
Yeah,
Channel maybe held about 300-400 people, and they'd play there on the
down on the water.
Yeah. Other band that's current is Dropkick Murphys.
Still around. They've been around.
Irish rock band. That they're from Boston. And if you ever heard Tessie, it's all about the Red Sox, and they're very outspoken on their political views, as well as they like to party. I used to see them back in 1996 when they first formed. They used to be a house band at a bar I would attend.
So what song do the Boston Red Sox sing?
Well, of course, they do Neil Diamond on the 7th inning stretch.
Well, there you go.
Sweet Caroline.
Sweet Caroline, my daughter's name.
Just a side note, if you have a chance to YouTube Sweet Caroline in Boston, and you're going to see something of at the subway station. We call it the T. Somebody is a busker is there playing guitar, and the whole place starts erupting with the song. So
I've been to Boston. I lived in Boston. I went there many times, but I've never been there when they played it.
Yeah.
So
we have the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones.
There you go.
There are some others. I used to live up the street from the Middle East, which could hold about 100 people. We used to see a lot of bands there. The Channel, the Orpheum, and those are the bands just coming up.
Tracy Chapman got discovered in Boston at Harvard Square.
Harvard Square. She was down in the coffee house in Harvard Square, right off of Brattle Street, and she was discovered there. Peter Wolf hung out and lived down the street from Van Morrison for a while in Cambridge. Well, Van Morrison was trying to find himself.
Van Morrison wrote a lot of Astro Weeks.
Yep, Astro Weeks.
The song it's been called his best album.
Yeah.
And he has about 52 albums, so it's quite an accomplishment. So
yeah, he lives in Galway now.
Yeah.
Coming up in the future, we're just gonna. I think we'll talk about specific bands and try to get into them. Best we know. We'll try to do a little more research, but I like to go by the seat of my pants and talk about what I know, and that's certain bands that I truly love. I still listen to Aerosmith every day. I still listen to Boston every day. I was just listening to Jimi Hendrix yesterday. I like the newer bands and newer rock, and we'll talk about that too.
I do too.
I love Dirty Honey. I actually am a Fall Out Boy fan. I've seen them twice, even though people don't like them. I love them. But I do try to listen to a lot of classic rock and new bands that are coming up. Not Greta Van Fleet. I'm against that. I hate them, but I do like Dirty Honey.
So, and also in our episodes, we'll have some guests on here.
Yes.
Which will, people that are really into music, and we'll have a cigar rep on here discussing, what's going on with cigars, the future of it, how it's going. So
and have live feeds, everything like that. So we'll see. But why don't we do a quick cigar?
Go ahead. You're up.
All right. So we have here Monte Cristo 1935 anniversary Toro. I'm sorry, it's not Toro. It's actually the number 2 Torpedo. This was rated number 95, and it was actually rated. It's right there, and it was rated the number 2 cigar by Cigar Aficionado this year. It is a fantastic cigar. It is all Nicaraguan. So that's wrapper, filler, and binder.
Everything in Nicaragua.
Everything is from Nicaragua, and it's actually made in Nicaragua. AJ's San Latano's factory makes it for Monte Cristo, which is owned by Altatus Company. and give a shout out to Old Havana Cigar Company in Westchester, where I work, that I buy these from.
And where we met.
And where we met. Now, I will tell you, this is a very full-bodied, rich cigar. It is immediately chocolatey. It, how can I put it? It is a full-fledged cigar that you would love. It's rich. It's creamy. The first third, you taste cream and sort of a cocoa. It's not peppery. It's all cocoa, but it's smooth but rich. So as you get halfway through the cigar, you'll tend to notice some other blends, sort of like a little bit of a stone fruit flavor. You'll hear me say citrusy sometimes. This isn't it, but you'll hear it in other reviews. It finishes well, and it burns very well. This cigar, when I do other cigars, they might last an hour. This is about a half-hour cigar, 40 minutes tops, because the roll is nice. It is a box pressed also, but it does burn very well.
And why a torpedo?
Well,
the shape of it is obvious.
The shape of it is like a torpedo. You can call it a bellicoso, but this is more like a number 2 torpedo. That's the official call for this one. So this is a number 2 torpedo. It's usually because it has a tapered end, and that's where you get a torpedo look to it. So they just call it a torpedo. If it was a little bit smaller, this is a 6-inch. If it's like 5 inches or 4 inches, they might call it a bellicoso. I suggest people get them, but the MSRP on this is between $20 and $21 each. Luckily, I get a deal on them, so I can afford to buy this.
That's 4 records back when I was buying them.
Exactly. So if you have a chance to have one, just to have one, I would invest in this. If you're only a smoker once a week or so, try this. You'll love it. I'm telling you. And you'll get my cigar review on this a little bit more in depth on our website, which is musicaldisciples.com, also rockncigar.com. And you can go through there. You can also subscribe. If you hit the subscribe button, you can get our podcast online for you right away. And that's it. So let's there's another one in the bathroom. Yeah. There you go.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
For listening, and hopefully tune in for some more.
Yeah. Good job, Chaz.
Well, kind of wing it a little,